Alrighty, we're gonna get started here. It's 7 o'clock on the dot. So we'll let the people out and here live get their seats real quick, and then we'll be on our way. For those of you out in Zoom land, as well as you that are here live that aren't aware, the website for the club is now up and running and active. So go check that out. Take a peek at it. Obviously, like anything, there'll be minor fixings here or there potentially, but for the most part, it's up and running. So happy to have that. Tonight, we're going to do a presentation on the Gettysburg Railroad, number 1278, and the boiler explosion it suffered. I did this presentation a while back with Eric Grover. He was going to be able to help me, but unfortunately, he's got a meeting with work tonight, so he can't make it. But on that note, we're going to get started. So basically, to start, we're just going to give some brief background on a steam locomotive in the day-to-day. And the reason for that is it'll kind of tie in and make a little bit more sense to what happened to the locomotive. So in this diagram you see, this is the generics of a steam locomotive. So steam locomotives run on a fuel as well as water. Some steam locomotives run on coal, which was what they originally were powered off of. And I guess even before coal, it was wood. As coal became tougher to get, some locomotives started switching over to oil-fired, which runs off of a mixture of steam and oil, atomizing the oil into particles and causing it to be basically an aerosol where it can ignite to create a flame and heat up the water. 1278 was a coal-fired locomotive. So in the tenders, you can see the light blue on the tender, that's where all the water was kept. And then there was coal as well. The locomotive itself, each locomotive might have been a little bit different. Boiler varies depending on the company that made it, as well as the arrangement. So this locomotive you see is a 442. The reason it's a 442 is it's got 4 wheels on the pilot, it's got 4 driving wheels, and it's got 2 trailing wheels. So the driving wheels, those are what basically make the locomotive move. So they get the power from the piston, the cylinders, and the valve gear. And the piston goes back and forth from the valve, as you can see, and it's timed. So as the wheels spin, the piston rods going back and forth will move that valve to put the steam in the right spot to push them back and forth. Similar to the pistons firing in an engine, modern engine nowadays. So you look in the firebox. If you look right here on the bottom, if you can see my mouse, this is where the coal would go. So the fireman shovels coal into the firebox. To obviously the coal is your fuel. The coal catches fire. This little bar you see right here is your arch. So heat will hit that. Your flame goes up and it runs down these channels that you see here that are orange. These are boiler tubes. Most steam, regular size steam locomotives will have anywhere from 200 to 300. And again, all those do is those will carry heat down through to allow the water to boil quicker. And surrounding those tubes is water. As the water heats up and it boils, it turns into steam. The steam goes up to the top of the boiler in the space up here. Part of it is the steam dome. And from the steam dome, the steam goes down through the dry pipe and to the valve gear. Some steam locomotives will have extra pipes in the boiler, which once the steam is made from the water, the steam will run through pipes and it basically makes it into a more dry steam. So you have a wet steam coming off of a locomotive originally, which comes straight from the water. And again, running it through these pipes will dry it out more, make it less wet, and it gives you more power in the valve gear, less water. The big thing when you're running a steam locomotive that the engineer has to be cautious of as well is there's cylinder cocks on the valve gear. As your engine sits, the wheels aren't moving. You want to keep those open. And then when you start to move, you want to keep them open as well. So any steam that's turned back into water, you can't pressurize water in the valve gear. So you got to be able to let that water escape. So a daily inspection on a locomotive. These are pictures that Eric took a few years ago of when I was doing some of my locomotive training on the 7470 up at North Conway. So daily inspection on a locomotive includes lubricating the locomotive. There's various lubricating points on the locomotive. You have your journals, you have your rods, air compressors. If the engine has a powered reverser, you got to lubricate that up. Lubrication can be used not just with oil, but we also use a mixture of soft grease and hard grease. Some railroads are switching to all oil, and they'll use different thicknesses of oil. Parts that need more oil more consistently will be a thinner oil, while parts that need less oil throughout the trip, they'll use a thicker oil. The thing to remember with a steam locomotive when you're running in the summertime, or if any of your lubricating points are close to the boiler, is you don't want your oil to heat up and turn thin. Once it turns thin, it loses its lubricating points, and then you're not getting what it's intended to do. Doing a blowdown to the water glasses in the cab. Basically what that entails is, if you can see the picture on the left, there's those two square valves. One's on the bottom where water can come in, and one's on the top where water can come in. You want to close one, and then underneath both those valves is a pipe that just drops to the ground. It doesn't go back in the boiler, and that's how you blow down. So you can see it, you can kind of see a ball valve right here. So you'll close both these valves, and you'll open one, and you'll open this ball valve underneath, and you'll open it for about 10 to 20 seconds. Then you'll close the valve that you'll close the valve that you would open, and you'll open the other one, and you do the same thing. Once you do that, you open that one back up, and you open both. They're open when you're normally running throughout the day. Basically, the bottom one's where your water comes in, the top one's your vent, so your water will show a consistent level. Why do you do a blowdown on the water gauge, you might ask? Well, and this is important to this presentation, water has minerals in it. Water is not, unless it's distilled water, and you can't run distilled water through a steam locomotive because it's just not possible. Water has minerals in it, and as the water turns into steam, the steam dries up, the minerals crystallize, and they'll turn into an actual solid. Well, over time, those will build up, and they'll block your ports. And what those can do is give you a false reading on your water. They can narrow the pipes and the valves and the passages going to your water gauge, so it might take longer for the valve to drop and rise depending on the level of water. So throughout the rule of thumb is about every hour you want to do a blowdown on the glasses. It takes about 30 to 40 seconds. Keeps them clean. Running the hot water through will help clean out any of that debris and matter. And realistically, these won't build up over a course of a day. It'll be, it could be, a month of if the engine was to run every day. But it's good practice, and it's a national standard as well. So blowing down the locomotive's boiler as well for any sediment. So again, same thing. There's the water in the boiler. As it turns to steam, dries out, turns into the minerals, and they crystallize. They can block all your ports and different points on your boiler. On the bottom of your boiler, in the mud ring of your firebox area, there's a valve called a blowdown valve. It's about a 2-inch pipe with a lever that runs up to the cab. You can open that up, and steam and water will come shooting out of it if the boiler's under pressure. Throughout the day, they normally tell you about every 2 hours you want to open that up for about 10 to 15 seconds. And that does the same thing. It clears the boiler out any debris, because the debris is going to be heavier than the water. It's going to drop to the bottom. So there could be particles of scale too from the metal, things like that you want to get out throughout the day. That way, if they get moved around in the water, they don't block valves and other things like that and cause issues. Testing the pressure relief valve. So when we start a steam locomotive from dead cold, we bring the locomotive up slowly, and once we get it to the boiling pressure, the pressure operation that the locomotive runs at, we want to make sure we build it so the pressure reliefs pop off. If they don't pop off during the morning fire up, then we don't run the locomotive for the day because there's an issue with them. And then they'll tease you as you get trained as a fireman. Every time that the boiler pressure relief valve goes off, you owe people lunch. I don't know who came up with that rule. It's not fair. I've lost a ton of money buying people lunch. Not my rule. But you got to make sure you test those in the morning. And again, throughout the day, if you're firing, you're thinking about multiple things. You're thinking about where you're placing your coal in the firebox, where your fire needs the coal. your water level, things like that. You might not be thinking of looking at the gauge every few seconds. Water or steam pressure can build pretty quickly depending on the locomotive. 7470 is a very easy locomotive to fire. It builds steam really easy. It's a great locomotive. But if the engine's not using steam, it will build steam pretty quick. So you got to make sure that those pressure relief valves work in case you're not paying attention to that. Each crew member does a 360 of the locomotive to look over all moving parts and ensure everything's in good working order. So I'm not an engineer, I'm a fireman. So my job each day, again, I get in and I make sure that the engine's brought up to temperature. I build the fire. I do all the testing of the everything that's not controlled by the engineer. So the water gauges, the air pump, the steam turbine that makes the electricity, the running gear, all that stuff. I go through, lubricate, and I make sure that everything's in good working order and is lubricated and everything like that. If I was the engineer, and I'm not qualified, but if I was, my job more so would be to kind of oversee things that the firemen did, right? So we want to make sure the engineer is basically the boss. The engineer wants to make sure that there's a good fire in the firebox, water levels being maintained, and that everything's been lubricated, everything like that. It's kind of a give and take between your engineer and your fireman. They work together, and it's a trust factor too. If your locomotive ran previous, and you really wouldn't have seen this back in the day on a scenic railroad, like where the 1278 was at a scenic railroad, these locomotives would have been banked every night because they're not running 24 hours a day. What a bank is basically is you run the locomotive the day before, you bring it into the roundhouse or wherever at night, and you got to make sure that your fire doesn't go out. If you leave it open, it's going to burn out. If you make a big pile of coal, and we found, thank you to Courtney Gregg, about 42 scoops of coal in the middle of the firebox in the rear by the fire door, and you pile it all up throughout the night, it'll smolder. By the next morning, you have a good pile of smoldering coal that you can rake out. All the fire that you had the day before is all cold. It's all ash. But the pile you made, it's all slowly burning. You can rake it out. There's nice coals. You can rake it out over the old ash. And within about 2 to 3 hours on at least 7470, you can have the engine building steam up again. If we left with the 7470 operates at 175 PSI, if we get it in the roundhouse and we're around 175 and we start letting it drop, by the time we come in the next morning, we're sitting around anywhere between 30 to 50, depending on how good the bank reacted. But the water's already hot and there's already a little bit of steam, so it's pretty easy to bring that up. You still want to bring it up slow because it's old and it's metal, and metal expands under heat, so you don't want to break anything. But if you did that, all the old ash that you had from the day before or from the last trip, you want to get that out of the firebox so you have air coming up through the grates. So the grates on steam locomotives, you can rock back and forth and they'll shake, and any of that loose ash will drop into an ash pan that sits underneath the locomotive. And then throughout the day, if you have dead coal, which turns into ash, we can shake the grates throughout the day as well, and that will keep the fire burning while getting a good draft. And then last but not least, before you go out for the day, you want to make sure you have enough coal and water in your tender for a reserve. So here's a picture of the daily inspection from left to right. So on the left, that's the bank. So you can see the top's pretty much burnt off, but you can see there's a really nice pile of coals under that top layer. The second picture, we rake the bank out and we're adding fresh coal to extend the bed of coals and build the firebox out completely with fire. The third picture, all the ash that we dumped from the day before, we're pushing it into the ash pan. There's a little sill on 7470 where some can sit, so you got to push it in. And then the last picture, we're dumping the ash that's in the ash pan from the previous day. So in North Conway on the roundhouse lead, we have an ash track. We'll dump the ash, and then as the ash track builds up, we'll go in with a loader and we'll dig it out. And then the ash will either go to companies to use for fertilizers or stuff like that, or some people will buy it for fill. So maintaining locomotive throughout the day. Throughout like I said earlier, throughout the day, a steam engine is consistently checked for water and coal. When the engine is not moving, the blower valve is used to create a draft. Uh, the other thing you can see on the picture on the right, that is a injector. The injector is what takes the water from the tender and puts it into the boiler. These need to be tested once you get enough steam for them to operate to make sure that there is water going into the boiler. Because there's no worse feeling, and it's happened, when you get up to boiler pressure and you run the injector for the first time of the day and they don't work. And now you're up to a pressure where the water's being boiled and it's dropping quicker, and you have no way to get water into your boiler. Moving over to the Gettysburg Railroad. So the Gettysburg Railroad was built in the late 1800s and opened in 1891 as the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railway. The line was later leased to the Reading Railroad and was named the Gettysburg Branch. The station at Gettysburg Railroad is the location where President Abraham Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address. In 1971, when the Reading Railroad filed for bankruptcy and sold a majority of its assets to the newly formed Conrail in 1976. However, the Gettysburg division was not part of the transfer to the Conrail Corp. The line was acquired by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, which sold the railroad to a new company called the Blairsville and Indiana Railroad in 1976. The company later changed its name to a more fitting name known as the Gettysburg Railroad. The railroad served as a passenger railroad to tourists, but also shipped freight to the local Conrail interchange. The railroad was sold in 1996 and is now a museum for President Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address, since this was the location he gave it at. The locomotive 1278. Locomotive number 1278 is a 462 G5D class engine built by the Canadian Locomotive Company in Kingston, Ontario, proudly receiving the serial number of 2435. The engine was built with a 117 tonnage rating, of which made them great for branch line and passenger service. The engine was equipped with modern-day items new to the industry, an Alesco 5 poppet front end throttle, an Alesco feedwater heater and stoker, a new style button head stay bolts, and a small firebox with no large expansive sheets to control expansion and contraction. Kind of like I stated, with 7470, these small firebox styles were very easy to fire, maintain, and very much a hard and strong locomotive. Now the thing, and we're going to go back to locomotive types real quick. The thing that people don't really realize, and I guess another good locomotive for those of you that know it, is Canadian National 89, which is at Strasbourg. Some of these engines have really huge driving wheels on them. That, like, I'm 6 foot tall, and 89's got 6 foot drivers. But that engine has a smaller boiler than 7470. The purpose of those was they weren't made for heavy hauling capacity as much as they were built for speed. Those bigger drivers allow for more speed and short power, pretty much, for a small load for branch line work. So 1278 being a 462. The drivers are really big, but it has no more drivers than 7470, which is an 060 switcher. But the difference is 7470 has got small drivers versus the 1278 has big drivers. The history of the Canadian Pacific 1278. So it was built in 1965 for the Canadian Pacific. How many of you in the crowd were born before 1965? No one's throwing their hands up, but I know some of you are lying. All right, so that date's wrong. Thank you. So, yep, that date's wrong. I do know for a fact, though, because I was editing this today, so that's an error on my behalf. But I know it was built after the 1940s, so it's a fairly newer steam locomotive for the steam era, because steam locomotives stopped being built around the mid to late 50s when the diesel locomotives came out. So it's pretty new for its age. In 1965, it was sold to F. Nelson Blount for the Steamtown USA Museum in Bellows Falls, Vermont. During the time it was under Blount's care, it ran many excursions on other railroads for rail enthusiasts. In 1986, when the owner of the original Steamtown passed away, Steamtown was moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and with the idea of opening the Taurus Railroad. 1995, the National Park Service took over and acquired the former collection of Steamtown, USA, for a cost of $66 million. In 1987, 1278 was traded to the Gettysburg Railroad for a larger CN 282. The reason for this, and it goes back to what I was just saying, is Steamtown was doing these bigger trips with more passenger cars versus Gettysburg being a smaller and slower tourist railroad. The 282 was a lot for their line, so it was a good swap between the two railroads. On the evening of June 16th, 1995, the 1278 suffered a major crown sheet failure, ending its life and almost taking the lives of 3 employees. In 1998, Jerry Jacobson purchased the 1278 and stored it until being sold. And currently, it is at the Age of Steam Roundhouse Museum in Sugar Creek, Ohio, where it is on display. And it has not been touched since the explosion. So you can see, if you ever get out there and you can see the locomotive, the deformation from in the crown sheet is still present. They haven't cut it out or anything. It's still there. Background of the employees working that day on the 1278. The engineer, who is 48 years old, he had received most of his training knowledge growing up on the Pennsylvania Railroad, watching locomotives near his house as a teenager. In 1978, he became the primary operator of the steam locomotives at Gettysburg. He worked as the primary servicer at Pennsylvania, excuse me. He worked as the primary servicer, maintainer, and repairer of the locomotive and cars while contracting out some work to others. And he was also the person responsible for all paperwork and maintaining records. Fireman number 1. He was 18 years old. He was only firing the engine for the dinner train that night. He had been an employee of the railroad since 1992, so about 3 years. He was working full-time that summer while on summer break when the accident occurred. He had no prior railroad experience, and his training was just on the job. He was trained by others full-time employees over the years. I'm going to add real quick as we go through this presentation. One of the terms we say all the time, as unfortunate as it sounds, is rules are written in blood. Back then on railroads in those times, people learned by doing on-the-job training. You can sit in a classroom and learn through PowerPoints and all that, but the best way you're going to learn is actually doing it. So some people will say, well, they were wrong, they didn't have enough training. Well, that may be, but the on-the-job training is way better than the classroom training. Fireman number 2. He was 32 years old, and he was a part-time fireman for over 5 years. He also had no previous on-the-job training, and mostly everything was done by the engineer. He made about 50 trips each season for the first 3 years, and he made half a dozen trips for the last 2 seasons before the accident. So what happened to the 1278 locomotive? After reading many reports on the accident, and again, this is all research that Eric and I had done, so if this isn't true, I apologize, but this is what we found on the web. It is very safe to say that human error and lack of maintenance to the locomotive were the contributing factors. During the day, a check valve from the feed pump in the boiler had been continually leaking since the morning. It was noted that when the engine was running backwards prior to this day, it was spraying the passenger cars when they were running around the train. I have some videos on here, but unfortunately, if I played all the videos, we'd be here till about 10 o'clock. But if you look up the 1278 locomotive online, you can actually see a video from the day of the explosion, and it's from one of the passenger cars, and you actually can see the water and the mist coming off of that valve. So this issue was noted, and the feed pump was shut off, thus making wheel slip to the engine. Continued future on in the day, one of the firemen turned the feed pump back on all the way open. In the investigation report, it was asked if the fireman could confirm the valve was working, and they concluded by watching the feed pump rod moving, they were confident of the operation. Another key problem when asked was the observation of the water glass. This is a water glass that shows the height of the water in a locomotive boiler. It is very intricate with all the bouncing around in the locomotive. Steam locomotives are not Cadillacs. I will add that. They throw you around, and 7470 especially, since it's only an 060 and the wheelbase is short, that engine throws you around. It rides like a fish. It rides like a fish out of water. Up and down, side to side, it bounces quite a bit. And even bigger steam locomotives. If you look at videos from the cab of the 4014 Big Boy, in the cab of that, they get bounced around quite a bit as well. So the water level in the boiler throughout the day, you really can't get a accurate reading. You kind of gotta. We kind of tell people watch where at the top of it, where it is at high before it drops when it's the water's bouncing back and forth, and it's somewhere in that middle. So you kind of got to guess, and it's all by experience. And again, that's something that you learned throughout your time operating locomotive from your trainers, your teachers, and stuff. So two firemen said they checked in on the water glass all the time, whether it was continuous or every 5 minutes or so. The engineer said he also kept an eye on the glass from his seat on the right-hand side. With the vibrations and the movement of the engine, it only moved up and down by a half to a full inch, which was normal for that engine. It wasn't more than a few minutes before the crown sheet failed. Testimony from Fireman 1. While the crown sheet failed, it sounded like a muffled .22 rifle pop. I instinctively turned toward the noise. I remember getting hit with, it just got dark because of all the soot and the smoke in the cab. And I remember feeling intense heat and thinking, I've got to get out of here. I jumped out and yelled at the engineer's wife, who was also on the train, to call 911. Or she might have been chasing it. I can't remember. But he yelled at her to call 911. And then I thought about the engineer and started back up. Just the other fireman. I knew he was all right then because I saw him. He was limping, but I knew he was all right. Then I went to find the engineer and found him on the other side of the train lying there, and he asked for his wife. So I ran back and got her. She handed me the phone, and I continued with the 911 call. Fireman 2, his testimony. The first fireman stepped down to fire the back corner of the firebox, and I told him to take a break and I'd take over firing, which I guess gave a time span of about 5 minutes from the point until the explosion. There was like an initial poof sound, but then there was like a second explosion, which is what jarred the fire doors open and dumped everything back into the cab. All the steam and a lot of the coal just blew back into the cab. We had the feed pump on and had the stoker on. I shut the stoker and the feed pump down, and at first, just not knowing where everything was coming from, I jumped forward in the cab between the boiler and the outside wall of the cab to try to get away from it. After about 10 or 15 seconds, I realized it wasn't getting any better, and that's when I realized it wasn't. Sorry, that's a mistype. And that's when I came back to the seat, and you couldn't see anything as far as the doorway or anything. So that's when I climbed up on the seat and jumped out the window. Almost immediately after the explosion, the first fireman went out the doorway, and to my knowledge, the engineer apparently stayed on until it stopped. Consequences of their injuries. So Fireman 1 received a second and third degree burns over 10% of his body. He was moved around to a couple hospitals where his recovery took 1.5 months. Fireman 1 was the one that jumped on the initial explosion, remember. So he got out before the second, more severe explosion. Fireman 2 received a second and third degree burns on his legs, arms, and chest, and had fractured his legs when he jumped out the window. He was hospitalized for several weeks and had extensive therapy for his shoulder. The engineer, he stayed in the locomotive through both explosions and didn't get out until he brought the engine to a complete stop. He was flown to a burn center near Philadelphia, where he had third-degree burns covering 65% of his body. His recovery time was 9 months with extensive therapy and multiple surgeries to recover. Contributing factors to the explosion. The crew began to climb a grade with too little water in the boiler. The water level continued to drop, and by the time the engine made the grade, there wasn't enough water, causing a thermal overstress of the crown sheet. Water flashed into high-pressure steam through the firebox door in the locomotive, injuring and burning the crew of 3. So basically, to add on to this a little bit, so what had happened, and then we might get into that again, and if we do, I apologize, but this was before there were rules and there was more standard set of regulations for your daily inspection on a steam locomotive. This didn't include the blowdown of the boilers or the water glasses or anything like that. What had happened was they hadn't done any blowdowns on the water glasses in quite a long time, and that sediment that I was talking that can build up caused a inaccurate reading on the water gauge. So even though the water gauge was showing, it might have shown that the boiler was at the right level, the water was lower because the water in the gauge was taking slower to drop to catch up to the actual level, giving a false reading. And then when they had the false reading, um, and the water wasn't covering the crown sheet, and the crown sheet's the crown sheet is the sheet. If you look inside the firebox on a locomotive, you look through the fire doors where you shovel the coal. That piece of metal that you'll see, that's the crown sheet. So between the crown sheet, there's water surrounding it, and then there's the outer sheet around that. So water surrounds the inner and the outer sheet. Well, what happened was, as the water got below the top of the crown sheet, and the crown sheet started to build up excessive heat because it's water boils at 212, 213 degrees, and the metal started heating up. And again, like I said, you want to bring locomotives up slow because it's metal. Metal will expand. The metal had expanded, and when they dumped the cold water on it, it had shocked the metal, causing quick expansion and contraction and failing the stay bolts. So prior to operation, the feed pump gauge had been removed. Preparing to ascend the grade, the first fireman shut off the feed pump to the boiler because it was leaking between the boiler and the valve. The boiler pressure dropped from 230 psi to 175, and the fireman didn't add water, but did watch the water glass. The boiler's water level indicators in boilers had not been cleaned as indicated, like I had mentioned. And when they had been cleaned, they were not done properly. Also, the water glass was not properly illuminated. So one of the things we have to have is a light bulb behind each water glass to make sure, even at nighttime, or if you're in a shady spot during the day, you still can see where the water level is. Because it is kind of hard to see, believe it or not. What changes were made since this incident? So after this accident, the FRA teamed up with Gettysburg Railroad to make changes in rules to steam locomotives. These changes included morning inspections with a water glass blowdown. They also made sure that railroads were doing the 15-year or 1492-day boiler tube and superheater check and replacements, which most people know as an overhaul. They also made 30-day inspections, which includes a boiler wash to clean out all the sediment, and this requires all the boiler plugs to be removed. So going over these a little bit more in depth. So every 15 years, or every 1,492 days of the engine operating, the engine has to be completely stripped down, and everything basically needs to be gone through. So ultrasounds need to be done on the boiler to check the metal thickness, as well as all the boiler tubes need to be taken out and new boiler tubes need to be put in. If some engines have superheaters, then the superheaters need to be replaced as well. Your 30-day inspection, every 30 days of operation, the engine needs to be taken out of service. And throughout the boiler, there's different points where there's plugs. They're about 3-inch plugs, threaded plugs. You take those out and you put a pressure washer in, and you'll pressure wash around. The other thing you'll do as well is you'll fill the boiler up with, once you drain the water that's in the boiler from operation, you'll put the plugs back in, fill the boiler back up, and then you'll drain that water out as well. And then from there, you'll do a wash using pressure washer, garden hoses, things like that to clean it out. And then there's other things as well that need to be done. Like the glass on the water gauges needs to be changed, as well as the gaskets on it. Certain things like that, minor things, but they all, from the wear and tear over time, they need to be checked and replaced. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Let's see I think we've got time for one video. I can't remember which one it is, so I'm gonna. Yeah, this is the one. Federal investigators have wondered why. The difficulty they face is trying to figure out if mechanical failure or human error, or a combination of both, may be to blame. This looks like kind of an isolated incident. It might have been isolated, but Steam Locomotive 1278 in Gettysburg was in serious trouble Friday night. The tourist train was carrying about 100 passengers on a dinner excursion in northern Adams County when an explosion occurred in the engine's firebox. So we have a door shooting on here.
National Transportation Safety Board investigator Russ Quimby suspects water or steam got into the firebox. How it got there is not sure.
If you see right here on the top, that is where the crown sheet failed. Now, if you get it, this picture doesn't do necessarily a good justice, but that dropped approximately 8 inches. It pulled the sheet right apart from the stay bolts, and the stay bolts, depending on their location, they're either welded in, welded and threaded, or just peened over. These ones on the inside are welded and threaded on this locomotive. So for it to pull those apart, it's pretty impressive.
In this incident, the blast was isolated to the cab of the locomotive, where the train's 3 crew members were seriously burned. The mishap could have come at a worse time for Gettysburg passengers, which operates the tourist train. This is the busy season, and by the end of the year, we'll have carried.
That's the 1278 locomotive, as you see.
The 8th excursion. She believes the train was already having problems when she and other passengers got wet while riding in an open-air coach.
I would think that if this was usual, he would have warned us in first place not to sit there.
But the train's operators say it's not unusual for steam to release a spray and get some of the open-air passengers wet. Those we spoke to deny being aware of any mechanical problems. Well, investigators say it can take at least a month to determine the exact cause of the explosion. In the meantime, the Gettysburg Passenger Service, which operates these trains, expects to resume excursions on Thursday.
Instead of using our normal steam engines, we'll be using diesel. It'll be the same exact trip, we'll just be using a different type of engine.
Meanwhile, the investigator
So here's some photos of the locomotive prior to the explosion. These photos were taken by Les McDonald and John R. Grover, Eric's father. So if you actually look on the smoke box of the locomotive, that white stuff, that's all the minerals in the water. So, and it literally forms a crust. You can see the valve right here that's steaming in front of the cab. That's your feed pump for the water. You can see there's actually some leakage from underneath. Now, granted, they're all brass, or most of it's brass and bronze, so you're not going to get a perfect seal, but normally they don't leak like that. So when it was at Steamtown, it was numbered at the time 127. And the engine in this picture, actually behind it, is Canadian National 89, which is actually at Strasburg Railroad now. And you can see 89 back when it was labeled up as Green Mountain. These are just the references that we used. So that pretty much brings us, wraps us up. We're gonna open up people's mics if they have any questions or comments. We're gonna limit questions and comments to about 5 minutes, just so we don't drag on a long time. But give us 1 sec. Yep. Here, right? At least 2 of those. Perfect. All right. So if anyone has any questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves now.
While I understand that number 1278 had an unpredictable future after being not cared for, was there like some sort of mechanical problems or boiler failures when it comes to a explosion?
Well, it's a good question. That all kind of depends on the care of the locomotive. So, a lot of people think, and you really don't learn it until you get into learning how steam locomotives work, is, and I guess a good example will be the main central 505. There's nothing wrong with those boilers. The main central engines actually had really good boilers. The issue itself was maintenance issues and lack of care that was noted but wasn't taken care of. Um, Steam locomotives throughout the years that have ran on railroads, uh, as much as it could have been mechanical failure from building the boiler, a lot of it can come down to error of maintenance, such as, again, checking your water levels, doing your routine maintenance, things like that. Like I said, 1278, they didn't have a proper checklist or anything to really go through, so they ended up having some faulty gauges and valves and stuff like that that ended up causing false readings and leading to this issue.
Probably they didn't take good care of the engine, unlike the number 76. And maybe they should have checked the water level in the tender.
Right. So one of the big things throughout the day, and that actually brings up a good point too, is while you're running a locomotive and you're checking your water in your boiler, you also want to check the water in your tender, because if you run out of water in your tender, there's no water going into your boiler. But yeah, good questions. Anybody else in Zoom land have any questions? Going with none. Yeah. Hang on one sec. We have one in the crowd.
There you go. Yeah, Jack, you mentioned that the Gettysburg Station, I guess, is now a museum. Is the Gettysburg Railroad still functioning? Is it there are no tourist runs or that?
Pretty much after this incident was, I think Jimmy might know more, but I know by the end of the 1990s, the railroad was pretty much done with. This kind of started the slow downfall. They got heavily fined on a bunch of this stuff, and I know they had a bunch. For a while they had to cut trips because they didn't have enough to fuel the locomotives, pay the people, stuff like that. They went to a more volunteer base, kind of going backwards. And then I just from there kind of.
So you think it's the line is abandoned now, essentially? Or?
Unfortunate. The station actually in really good shape. Every 2 days it seems like, but it's in really good shape. It's a cool museum. I want to go there. It's on the list, but you take good care of the station. So
Good. Okay.
Perfect. Well, on that note, that concludes this month's meeting. Kind of like I said in the beginning, the website for the club is up and running, so make sure you go over and take a look at that, check it out. But other than that, we're going to be logging off. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next month.